Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Government After Shock Innovators Insight session on charting a way out of complexity on portfolios, systems, and anticipation. My name is Piret Tõnurist. I work at the Observatory Public Sector Innovation, and I lead the work on systems thinking and anticipatory innovation governance. Today, we're going to discuss with our distinguished panel these topics about uncertainty and complexity. And yesterday, we already had 60 different events around the world with Government After Shock, with over 4,500 different participants. And one of the recurring topics from these discussions was that governments need to actually anticipate, experiment, and explore systemic solutions to upcoming challenges and challenges that the governments are already facing today. So we heard a lot about transformation, innovation portfolios, and also about the things that we need to do beyond the crisis. And currently, the crisis has opened the window of opportunity. You know, policy options that were not available for us before are now available and on the table. We have a window of opportunity to explore and do things differently, to bring new solutions to the table. But the question here is how to keep this momentum going. Can we only innovate and transform how we do things during a crisis, but can we actually bring it forward? So in this panel, we're actually going to talk about which kind of methods and approaches we can take forward from this crisis so that governments can become more anticipatory and transformative in nature. And here I'm also going to be joined by a very distinguished panel from different experts and innovators in our community who have very specific insights into these topics. So I'm joined here by Elena Rovenskaya, who is a program director at the Advanced Systems Analysis in the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. She has been working together with policy makers around the world in terms of making them aware how to make decisions under complexity and uncertainty. The second panelist is Hiroki Habuka, who is the Director Deputy in the Digital Economy Division in the Commerce and Information Policy Bureau in the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry in Japan. And they have moved into great areas on real-time monitoring and new approaches of digitalization and digital transformation during this crisis. We have Márton Herczeg, who is the Head of Strategy and Impact Unit at the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, one of the biggest agencies in the European Union, who is leading the greatest missions that are covered by our time. And last but not least, our very own David Winickoff, who is a senior policy analyst in the Science, Technology and Innovation Directorate at the OECD, who is also leading the work on emerging technologies and anticipatory innovation areas. So please do join us in this discussion. On your right side of your screen, you will see the chat function. You can add your questions in the question area from the chat, but your comments are more than welcome in the chat as well. We are also going to start a poll now in a question about which innovation methods would you like to see getting more traction beyond the COVID-19 crisis. So please also respond to the poll and we'll bring out the results later on in the session. But for now, I'm going to turn to our panel, our innovators, and I'm actually going to ask them which are the kind of the methods that you would like to work with, or kind of systems aims that you want to introduce with uncertainty and complexity, and what have you actually learned from the crisis so far? So what kind of methods have you applied so far in your own work in doing things that you want to also carry forward in doing work beyond the crisis as well? So I'm going to give the floor for Márton for the first kind of notes on the topic.
Thank you very much, Piret, and greetings to everybody all over the world from Budapest, Hungary. It's a pleasure to be here with you and my fellow panelists. This topic is, of course, not easy, and I guess your introduction refers back to a lot of takeaways from yesterday. I like to think about a flock of birds, like starlings flying above a vineyard, right? Can you imagine this seemingly coordinated movement of hundreds of birds I mean, there is no leader. They only follow very simple rules in relation to their closest neighbors, yet the group carries out a seemingly coordinated movement. Can you hear me? I'm back. Hopefully, I think there was a little technical glitch. Thank you. So the system of culture, market, regulation, ecosystem, also physical environment interact as complex adaptive systems, and they continue to co-evolve. So there is uncertainty, but unlike, for example, modeling the effect of increasing income taxes, innovation is a much more uncertain process. And the outcome can be largely uncertain, and the scale-up may take also time to understand the effects. So going into the how and the methodologies, I explain a little bit, how we do things at the EIT, an independent body of the EU, which was set up in 2008 to enhance Europe's competitiveness, to tackle common global challenges, but also to change the innovation culture in Europe. And currently we are Europe's largest innovation network with over 2,000 partners, 8 thematic pan-European knowledge and innovation communities that we have set up. They tackle different societal challenges. We are present all over Europe with more than 60 innovation hubs. We have supported more than 3,000 ventures, developed more than 1,000 products and services, generated over 10,000 jobs. We have more than 3,000 students who graduated from EIT-labeled master and PhD programs. And the ventures we have supported raised over 3 billion euro external investment. So you can imagine starting with a portfolio like this, when the crisis came on EIT, we actually were fit for this fight. Because we plan for impact-driven projects, we distribute through small entities, like beehives, where subsidiarity is key, and we maximize the interaction across disciplines and allow for bottom-up control. This is actually the characteristics of leverages one can have on complex adaptive systems. So what we tried to do was indeed to deploy agile and adaptive working methods, going all home office, mission approaches. But we had to assess the portfolio we have at the beginning of the year, and to create a crisis response initiative, we call, to respond to the COVID challenge, in order to enable our innovators to be more responsive to this challenge. So we were very, very quick to set up a response to this pandemic. And we have channeled a substantial part of our budget, 60 million euro, to 207 new innovation projects and ventures from 32 countries. We have received 15,000 proposals in a very, very short time, actually, in response to this call. And just one example out of these many that you can also find some of these on a website. Was from the innovation community called EIT Health, coordinated by an action from the clinical hospital in Barcelona, where a virtual control center for patients who have tested positive for COVID-19 would be under supervision of expert infectious disease specialists. And this project has already contributed to a 50% reduction in the mortality rate immediately short term. We have also released an early funding for other projects, just to name a few. So if I would like to wrap up, I would say that probably all the aspects of agile and adaptive working methods, mission approaches, and so on, we had to deploy in order to be successful with responding to this, not mentioning the adjustment of our strategies and short-term operations as well.
Thank you so much, Márton. I'm going to follow up later on questions about how you actually did the portfolio analysis, but I'm going to give it over to Hiroki to tell us a little bit about their work in Japan.
I thank you very much, Piret, and thank you very much, Martin. So I'm very happy to be here. So good morning and good evening, everybody. I'm Hiroki, a Deputy Director at the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry of Japan. So our society is changing dramatically because of fast development of cyber physical systems. Previously, cyberspace was only a part of a society which is not strongly connected with the physical world. But now, the cyberspace is controlling the physical space, for example, by making transactions millions of times in a second, or driving a car in a public space, or maybe supporting medical diagnosis by reading X-ray photos. These were enabled by AI, IoT, interoperable softwares, and global networks. So because of these technologies, our lives became much more efficient and convenient and comfortable. But on the other hand, we are facing a lot of issues about governance. Previously, when things were more static, we could assume that the government could provide appropriate rules and effective monitoring and enforcement mechanisms. But in the age of digitalization, this fiction cannot stand anymore. In the society where we live, which is based on complex and fast-changing cyber-physical systems, our governance model also should be more agile and flexible and make use of power of technologies. One example is smart industrial safety, which is to use data and AI to maintain the safety of a plant or factory. Before, our regulation provided detailed safety requirements, including location requirements, facilities requirements, and operation process of the plant of the requirements. However, instead of providing such uniform duties, each plant could achieve better safety goals by monitoring real-time data of facilities collected by sensors, cameras, or drones, and detect risk by AI, which finds abnormal value immediately. In practice, many plants collect data from sensors and analyze them automatically for better safety. These technologies include, for example, text analysis, sound or image analysis, 3D model construction, or drone imaging. Previously, however, factories using these technologies still had to comply with detailed regulations, even though they could achieve better safety only by using data and AI. To promote more innovative, efficient, and safer method of maintenance using technologies, we have changed the regulation 3 years ago in 2017. Under the new regulation, if the plant operator can demonstrate that they can achieve high levels of safety using technologies, they could extend the statutory inspection term from every 1 year to every 8 years in maximum. This is a huge benefit to the plant operators since inspection requirements to stop the plant for a few days, causing large opportunity costs. So there is a lot of potential to use data and AI for better regulatory goals. But the question is how to make sure that they can actually achieve better outcome. To answer this, we have issued a white paper titled Governance Innovation in this July. Let me introduce a brief summary of the key points of the report. So by the way, this report is not only about plant safety, but more comprehensive perspective on how our regulation or governance mechanism should change. First, about rulemaking, we believe that laws should be goal-based rather than rule-based to make more room for innovative methods to achieve regulatory goals. Under such goal-based regulation, multi-stakeholders will create guidelines and standards so that even small companies can use the power of technologies. To see whether the regulatory goal is achieved properly, real-time monitoring would be the key. This real-time monitoring will be mainly conducted by business parties, and they owe a kind of accountability about the monitored data. The guidelines or standards will be reviewed continuously, getting feedback from the outcome of real-time data. About enforcement, it is important to incentivize businesses to cooperate with investigation, since government only cannot see what is happening in the cyberspace. For example, we could introduce a deferred prosecution agreement, DPA, whereby companies will not be prosecuted if they cooperate with the investigation of the public authority and commit to resolve the problem in the future. Above all, To achieve better governance in the age of uncertainty, collaboration with experts or citizens all over the world is a key. And that is why I appreciate this opportunity to discuss with leading experts today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hiroki. A lot to pick up in the discussion afterwards in terms of how technology has accelerated and also created opportunities, especially on the goal-based regulation, how it also allows kind of different solutions based on that goal below this regulation as well for companies and stakeholders to adopt. I'm going to give it over to David to talk a little bit about upstream anticipatory perspectives and how governments can anticipate technological or change otherwise. I'll give it over to you.
Thanks, Piret. And it's a pleasure to speak with this audience wherever you are distributed across the globe. And it's a pleasure also to join my fellow panelists who have some very interesting perspectives that are complementary to my own. I come from the world of science, technology, and innovation policy. And we've been learning some, I think, very interesting things amidst the pandemic and the crisis. New sorts of things, as well as we have a different viewpoint on some trends and things that we've been doing. I want to make two broad points. One is about the science policy system and what we've learned about the responsiveness of science and technology to address some of the health innovation needs. And secondly, we'll pick up on the issue of anticipatory governance in the realm of technology. And I think it works very well with Hiroki's own presentation. The first point is around what we've seen with the science and technology and innovation system. We've seen an unprecedented mobilization of resources. The science and innovation community across national borders, across sectors, civil society, shows that actually there are modes of cooperation and integration that we perhaps didn't know were possible, as well as a degree to mobilization of resources and activities. This is interesting for, and has a lot of implications moving forward for the question of how exactly science and technology might address grand challenges in the future. So science and technology communities have talked about how to make their work more directional towards goals for some time and experiment in certain ways. The crisis, I think, shows how, in fact, it's possible. It's a question of will and need, and that perhaps we've learned things about cooperation in the STI system that we didn't know before. Secondly, I want to touch on something about technology governance, and it relates to what I think is an interesting piece of this puzzle, which is the criticality, you could say, and fragility of the technology and society relationship. And we've seen that in issues of science advice, which I think we'll hear about more. But also generally, of course, being worried about anti-vaxxers and climate deniers. And I think it shows that there's a troubled sometimes relationship between technology and society. And one can see, in fact, how technology and society are developing simultaneously together. Technology isn't just a deterministic force on society. In fact, there's a way in which they co-evolve. And this is where foresight and participatory technology assessment is important. It's processes to anticipate, not predicting future states of innovation, but rather asking questions about plausible futures so that we may act in the present to help bring about the kind of futures that we want. And we can see this in open processes of STI agenda setting. We've seen it under Horizon 2020 in Europe a few years ago. That's fallen off a bit on Horizon Europe. We see it in upstream forms of governance like safe by design and nanotechnology, ethics by design and AI approaches. And we see this finally, the simultaneous development of regulation and technology around things like living laboratories, experiments in the co-development of autonomous vehicles and regulation. So I would end there, but I think it builds quite nicely on Hiroki's point about how technology and governance operate together in a complex system, but an important one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. I'm going to give it over to Elena to think and also give us kind of a complexity and systems perspective to the same question.
Yeah, thank you, Piret. And it's really a pleasure to participate in this event. Greetings from Vienna, Austria. I'm very happy to share our experience and our perspective. And indeed, my contribution will really continue on David's point about science. And we here at IIASA, International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, have run a project together with ISC, International Science Council, that was called Bouncing Forward Sustainably. And that refers back to what Piret was talking about earlier. So how can we use the opportunity of the crisis to build something differently, better, in order to prepare to next crises, which of course will happen, and we don't know what nature of those crises will be. So what's interesting about COVID, one observation is that on the one hand, scientists were actually warning us about the possibility of such a pandemic. And this was not something entirely unexpected, but on the other hand, it's really amazing because COVID-19 really took the world by surprise. And so this combination of these two facts, I think, is really something striking and something that really has to give us lessons. How can we really harvest from what science is already doing, and how, on the other hand, can we adjust the science systems? Because of course, COVID-19 also revealed a number of weaknesses and trends in the science system. So how can we adjust the system in order to make it better prepared to provide input to crises of different nature in the future? So I'm very briefly would like to talk about this project and its outcomes so far. So we had really a broad consultative process that we have run with stakeholders coming from science community, science policy community, advisors, business people, and so on. So we formulated, the work is still in progress and the report is still being finalized, but we formulated 38 recommendations that really together as a systems approach, really we put forward as our suggestion from this group and from this consultation, how to improve the science system. So obviously I cannot speak about 38, but I want to highlight 6 very, very quickly. So one has to do with the content of research. And as I said, so on the one hand, a lot of research has been done and is being done already on different kinds of risks, and also on the resilience of our systems. But on the other hand, there are some weaknesses. And of course, we all understand that COVID-19 and probably other crises in the future will be really multidimensional. And therefore, the need to have interdisciplinary research that informs policy, I think, is quite evident. But furthermore, not only interdisciplinary research, but transdisciplinary research is required. So not only we want to cross boundaries between disciplines, but also between science and other social and political spheres. So this is referred to as transdisciplinary research, and that is really how one can close the gap between knowledge and action that is required to address the crisis. So the second one would be linked to what several previous speakers actually talked about, and that is the linkage between the private sector science and public sector science. So more academic research and that science that is sitting in the private sector. So with COVID-19, we really have seen how important it is that they could work together, and how many potential solutions and useful knowledge the private sector is actually having, but there are really many barriers for them to really work together effectively, although of course there are successful examples, and the first speaker, Márton, spoke about it very briefly, I guess. The third one has to do with the agility of the science system. So we also saw with COVID-19 how important it is the speed with which we react to the crisis, and therefore the dissemination of scientific knowledge, how to accelerate it. So there are many specific recommendations. There is no time to go into that, but really accelerating sharing of knowledge that is emerging in the science system and make it available to the policy circles, to the public, is really critically important. It's very important to support institutions that deal with risk, both research institutions and science advisory institutions. Yeah, so it's really paradoxically, there are examples, there are a few countries, coincidentally, I suppose, that really decreased the funding of their institutions that deal with or are supposed to deal with epidemiology, public health issues and so on, just before COVID-19 actually started. So, and it's not one country, it's really several countries that did that. So it's really important to have stable and robust institutions dealing with this crisis. And finally, last but not least, of course, international cooperation and scientific cooperation. So again, the role of global networks, science as a public good, cannot really be underestimated. And that is important in general, but specifically for developing countries who may not have enough own scientific capacity, but who can use these networks effectively to tap knowledge from other parts of the world. And again, with COVID, we saw a few successful examples, actually. So one being Democratic Republic of Congo, who were able to really build their policy responses quite rapidly by relying on the knowledge that they were able to draw from other countries. So these are very, very short snapshots of our conclusions, and I'm looking forward to further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elena. In between, I'm also feeding back from our poll that is going on the website. At the moment, anticipation and futures thinking is leading as a kind of a method to retain from the crisis, with 47.8%, followed by agile and adaptive working methods, systems approaches with 34.8%, and following by challenges and missions approaches. We also have a comment on the kind of the poll that is still ongoing, that Nehao Jan also found it difficult to answer the options, and for a very specific reason, because you need agile and adaptive working methods and also system thinking to actually work together to have a response to do effective futures thinking as well. So of course you need different methodologies to work together. And as challenges and missions was kind of downrated within the poll by our observers, then yesterday, during a kind of an innovation portfolio session that the observatory and we were running ourselves with how to do innovation portfolio analysis, then one of the kind of the stakeholders or participants also mentioned that government's ability to have an understanding about what they're already doing in the innovation field is rather limited, that we want to always introduce new missions, new goals, but we're not actually looking at what we're already doing, and some of the kind of the innovation mix that we have already in place, does it actually contribute to the goals that you want to achieve? So I'm going over to maybe back to Márton's point that how did you actually look at your innovation portfolio when the crisis hit? What was relevant and what was not relevant? How did you actually do it?
Thank you very much, Piret. So probably before I give the concrete answer, just a little bit of introduction on how the engine room looks like at the EIT when it comes to managing grants, so you understand the intervention logic. For us, at least staying relevant is easy in the sense that all the innovation communities that we give grants to are set up to tackle different societal challenges like sustainable energy, climate change, food chain, raw materials, and so on. 8 topics we cover at the moment. So at least we know that the grand societal challenges is relevant. On the other hand, what we also do now is deploying, as I mentioned, impact-led planning. We're developing an own impact framework, which allows us to ensure that projects that are selected and given funding to, they contribute to certain elements within the big mission of the EIT. May it be to create new products, may this be to spur entrepreneurial skills in education, may this be regional outreach, and so on. So as explained, we have slightly over 1,000 projects in the portfolio this year, 50% for innovation projects, roughly 30% education projects covering master, PhD courses, but all kind of massive open online courses, other trainings, and so on. The rest goes for business creation, entrepreneurship activities, and maintaining the ecosystem itself. So the model looks like we have these annual grants to the innovation communities, which run their own calls for all these activities with the over 2,000 partners. Yet, as I explained in early spring, we have realized that obviously a big chunk of these projects might be affected. So here comes the model that we have, which proved to be resilient enough. And this combination of the top-down steering, as I said, around the societal challenges, measuring impact-driven choice of the project. On the other hand, when it comes to operationalization, that we have this distributed mode, including all the actors involved in the innovation community. So within a matter of weeks, we were able to get back this intelligence and work through the innovation communities from all the partners to see what is the share of the project which might be need to stop, to be postponed, repurposed, and so on, in order to allow us for creating a new pool of budget, which our governing board also decided to top up from other reserves, exactly in order to help to make this response. And basically what we had to do is, indeed, this is a bit the point Hiroki also mentioned, within the rules of the binding us Horizon 2020 grant management rules, we made certain extraordinary changes which were allowed by the rules to be done by a director in order to allow for faster planning and faster release of this funding. But at the same time, not only the speed that we responded to, we also put there a different kind of business cycle and mechanism to monitor these basically on the go as these are being deployed, expecting results already by the end of this year in most cases. So also short-term results, but again, looking at the impact pathway where we expect impact to happen.
Excellent, very interesting, Márton. I know the European Union bureaucracy very, very well. So doing contracts with the EU and working with the EU for quite some time. And so it's very, very impressive how innovators can actually crack the bureaucracy when the need is so dire. So you can actually work through it. Maybe I can also go for a follow-up with Hiroki, because I would like also, I want to know that how did your ministry actually look at your innovation portfolio, or what you were actually doing in digital projects or projects that you were doing in the face of the crisis? Did you also have to make adjustments there?
Thank you very much, Piret and Márton. In Japan, actually, before the crisis, we were not very feeling urgent need to change our society into digital. But after the crisis, we found out that our society was just too old-fashioned. So we have just started to discuss about establishing our digital agency in our government. And also in May, we have established a digital architecture design center under our ministry. So in that project, under the Digital Architecture Design Center, we are trying to design a lot of innovative infrastructure from the public sector. And our first targets will be the industrial safety, as I explained before, and also drone control, or and also mobility is mass. And these areas are especially urgent for us because our society is aging, and now so many people don't have enough access to public transportation, and a lot of people are facing a difficulty for moving, especially because they're getting really old. So in that sense, we have started our discussion to how to save our lives, or how to help people actually facing the crisis. In the COVID era, a lot of people cannot get anything from the supermarket because sometimes they were prohibited to go out from home. And to achieve the mass services or drone deliveries, we need some infrastructure to connect different systems into one. And that's why we found it's important to start from that kind of areas to save human lives.
That is very interesting. Indeed, the crisis as well has also uncovered different types of needs and make it more urgent, because also the kind of inequalities of people's experience and from the crisis really makes it clear how these inequalities are also influencing outside of the crisis people's lives as well. We have also a very interesting question coming from the audience, and also very interesting also to follow up with what Elena was talking about. As Elena was also mentioning that several governments before the crisis actually defunded epidemic research because they didn't think that it was important. And we also have seen in several countries in the US and UK from 2015 to 2016, several foresight exercises on pandemics and even pandemics plans being prepared for the crisis that were very similar to how actually COVID played out. But why didn't it actually work? And this gives us to the question from the audience as well, is that the foresight exercises have anticipated the coronavirus pandemic for quite some time. It was not unpredicted or unprecedented. What does it reveal about governance systems in terms of using foresight products and activities? So what is missing? So I'll give it over to Elena first, and maybe also David can follow up with kind of anticipatory perspectives.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Piret, and thank you for this question from the audience. I think it's very important one indeed, and I could speak a lot about it, I think, but trying to keep it short. So two possible lessons observations that maybe we can make in that regard. So one is that it's really the mindset that we again and again observe that we tend to think that past determines the future. Yeah, so we tend to extrapolate the past and assume that maybe some small changes can happen, of course, and uncertainty in that sense, of course, we all understand, but we still cannot embrace this notion of deep uncertainty where the future may be radically different from the past. And that is what it really takes the mindset change. So, and COVID, of course, will contribute to that, certainly. Another one is that, and maybe it sounds a little bit self-serving for me as a scientist, but I still say it. So the role of science in our society is way too low. So let me say it very directly. I don't want to say that it's somebody else's fault, right? So it's everybody's fault. So also scientists. So the way how scientists communicate their science, but also the way how the public and policymakers perceive that, all of that needs to change. And this partnership, really a true partnership between these parties really must be established if we want to tackle crises like COVID-19 crisis in the future better. And the last small comment, however, a kind of footnote comment, that whether or not this was not so successful response to the crisis, it still remains to be evaluated, right? So on the one hand, of course, our systems were highly disrupted and an economy, society was highly disrupted, but it could have been probably much worse. So I wouldn't say that all this previous research and previous activities that have been done, that they have not had any positive effect. I'm sure they have, but of course one has to really look into that more carefully and give it a systemic evaluation. Thank you.
Exactly. Give it over to David to maybe follow up with an anticipatory perspective and solve all our problems.
Well, I think that we don't know. I think that there are some plausible explanations. One question to ask is, what kind of foresight are we doing? And are we including the relevant communities, and are we including more of a bottom-up perspective? And this can accomplish multiple things. It can accomplish better foresight, more perspectives, diverse perspectives. But I think it can also enroll more people in the fact that there's a problem or that there's an issue here. And I think we may have had a failure of public pressure, or there was not maybe enough public pressure around crisis management because it's a kind of probabilistic danger. It's not immediate. It's about sort of playing defense instead of going on the aggression. It's not really a sexy topic or one that makes politicians look good necessarily. The other possible explanation is that vaccine development, or the kinds of interventions that are useful against a pandemic like this, a virus, are really an area that's not profitable for industry, and this is a major problem. There's not necessarily a perceived, or the market is very unclear. Now we happen to have a very large market now, but it wasn't clear from the beginning how large this market is. So how do you build those? How do you engage the private sector into the development of vaccines and therapies when the bottom line is far from clear? So I think maybe a mix of some of those issues, as well as some of the things that Elena was talking about.
So maybe I can also give it over to Márton. Like, how does EIT make sense of upcoming trends, or how do you kind of do the prioritization about, that you don't end up defunding pandemic research just before the crisis?
Good question. But as I explained, what we have is relevant grand societal challenges that we need to be able to respond to. And I think here the key is in basically diversity of the actors who are involved, who can probably pick up immediately those response points which may become suddenly out of a crisis, unforeseen or foreseen, irrelevant. But probably there's a big noise of foresights, there's a big noise of probable events coming up or not coming up. And I think the beauty is to be able to pick up on those potential innovations at very, very early stage, which may very suddenly become relevant. Like such a video conference we are having now, probably, in business as usual world, extrapolated from the past. Previously, this would have been a physical event mainly, right? But now we're doing it online and it feels normal. Because we have adapted basically to a technology which was already there, but seemingly society had to co-evolve to this pressure due to some reason. So for the EIT, I can only repeat that basically the ability that we have 2,000 partners, more than 2,000 partners, who represent three sides of what we call the knowledge triangle. So both businesses, big multinational companies, small and medium-sized enterprises, universities, research organizations, startups, scale-ups, small businesses included. They basically, in constant co-creation mode, are able to pick up the most relevant points. So we did not foresee last November that we'll have to adapt to this, but we were able to deploy the means we had at our disposal to respond to it. And luckily, now we have a broad enough ecosystem which allows us to actually run forward with such projects. And some of these, as I mentioned, were not about new innovations. Some of these were about high impact startups that were already in the portfolio of the innovation communities, which would have been a loss for society to let go in a way. But on the other hand, we also know that they are very likely to contribute to other aspects, probably not to vaccine development, but maybe digital education, maybe other aspects of these societal changes, maybe mobility issues. One example is a product being developed for surface coating, right? That can be used at, for example, public transportation. You do this coating, which is antiviral, antibacterial coating. This was in development, and now all of a sudden this became super relevant and picked up by various actors, because now you just use this coating and you don't have to disinfect all the surfaces in a public tram or bus right away every hour or so, right? So this is probably really a mixture of all these elements which enable a society, but also an organization and a network like ours to remain resilient. I think that's the answer, instead of just having one silver bullet which fixes all these problems for the future.
Excellent. And picking up on something that Márton said about kind of societal challenges, and governments alone cannot deal with any crisis, and also kind of transformations are not only at the hands of government. So you have to actually involve the broader ecosystem to make change happen. But Hiroki was actually talking about the kind of goal-based regulation is a great way to get actually the ecosystem moving. But for those policymakers who are listening to us at the moment, we really want to know, how do you set up a goal-based regulation? How do you test it, or how do you design it so you actually know that it's something that will motivate the ecosystem to act in a way that you want to for them to act?
Thank you very much, Piret. Yeah, it's a very difficult and good question. So first of all, it is now impossible to maintain the rule-based regulation. So we should shift to the goal-based regulation because, for example, AI is unpredictable per se, and the system of systems is also unpredictable. So our society is getting too much uncertainty. But okay, so to say goal-based regulation is easy, but how to set the goal is really, really difficult question. For example, think about the COVID crisis and contact tracing apps. So actually, I was involved with designing the structure of the Japanese contact confirmation app. But the question is like, to what extent you want to keep your privacy instead of decreasing the efficiency of the contact tracing. So some of users may say, okay, I can provide my location data, but please give me more detailed data of the infected people. But the others say, I never want to have my personal data tracked. And in conclusion, Japanese government adopted the European style or Google Apple interface, which is very privacy friendly. And now we are checking whether this app is working well or not. But in general, it's really hard to say this is the best balance between privacy and healthcare. So likewise, for example, think about when we try to define the safety of the self-driving car, automotive cars. For example, now in Japan, about 3,000 people are dead because of the traffic accident. And if the new automotive cars hit 2,000 people per year, is it safe or not? So that is not the question of engineering, but it's more like a social engineering or politics or even philosophies. And our conclusion, our tentative conclusion is that it's impossible to provide a specific goal. And even if we provide a specific goal, it might change in the next year or 3 years later. So what we can do is get a lot of stakeholders and discuss the goals and try implement the technologies and see whether the technologies achieved the goals, but also whether people were satisfied with the initial goal. And maybe we have to change the goal. For example, if the contact tracing app is not working well, maybe people might want to give more privacy data to get more healthcare. So likewise, so what we can do is always check and review and feedback and set the goals. So to maintain this cycles. So this is my comment.
That is excellent. That is very dynamic and kind of experimentation-oriented mindset as well that we like to see in governments as well. But sometimes we also notice that governments already have systems in place that may actually be counterintuitive to this agile and adaptive approaches. In a crisis mode, everything is possible, but in a kind of a traditional mode of government, you have a budget cycle. European Union, for example, has a budget cycle. Things are set in stone. These goals are put there in kind of strategic plans, and it's very difficult to actually change things. And of course, we are in the government and public sector, we're also dealing with kind of political cycles and political goals that things naturally change, what our goals or proposals are. So coming to also one of our audience's questions from Tanji de Lestre, who's asking to what advice for prioritized foresight, the future thinking, or some of these kind of insights from science in kind of budget cycles or these traditional structures of government. How could we actually do that? So Yelena, I know that you have work together with policymakers to actually make them understand uncertainty and complexity. So what could we do?
That's a tough question. Very often these foresight exercises are presented as big success, and you know, once they have come to the final stage, to the stage of the final output, those who do them often present only the kind of positive side of it. But it is indeed a big challenge, and again, I would say it's a mindset that is required, and over time we probably can learn more how to do it, and also stakeholders will be more sort of used to this kind of exercises. So indeed, we run at YASA, we run quite a few such studies on different subjects. The challenge is even bigger. So it's not only that the budget cycle or the political cycle are those cycles are very short, but even the presence of people in their positions is also very short. Like it can even be shorter. So you can engage with someone in the policy sphere into the exercise, and then this person changes the position, and then you have to do something with that. So that is really a challenge. So maybe some practical observations we have made so far is that, of course, you want to make these exercises also beneficial for the participants. So you don't want to do it one way. So you benefit we as researchers, we benefit from the knowledge and from participation of stakeholders. The key is to make them benefit from that in the process. Yeah. So and that could be very different kinds of benefits. Like there could be the social learning involved. There could be even some fun involved. So, you know, there are these approaches of gamified foresight exercises when you design what is called serious games, and you you run these games with stakeholders. So usually this is what people like, and then they remember. But surely this field is really in its infancy at the moment, and so it's a lot still to be discovered and a lot to be developed.
Maybe I can also go to David for comment, because you're working a lot with stakeholders and kind of this upstream, response to technologies that they're having collaboration and participation. So are there any kind of approaches or methods to, for Hiroki as well, to say what are the kind of the values or topics that we should address for AI or other emerging technologies, or how can we actually include different types of voices into this discussion?
Thanks, Piret. I was stimulated by Hiroki's description of goal-driven regulation, and just to touch back on that. In these areas of complexity, the complexity is compounded, as you said, by the fact that these are socio-technical systems that we're talking about, that it's not easy to disentangle the technology from the social structures that are there, the kinds of infrastructure, physical, political, economic, and so forth. And so I think we tend to get into this language of adapting to technology, as if the technology itself is on this predetermined path. And I think with some of the anticipatory governance perspectives from the field of science, technology, innovation, part of the idea is to go upstream and have some participatory elements as technologies are being developed that go beyond just, let's say, quote, pure market influence, which doesn't really exist, a pure market influence. The market is mediated in all kinds of ways. So how can you engage the development of technology in a stakeholder way as you develop a kind of governance approach? And I want to give you one example, which I think is interesting. So in Toronto, a development agency for the waterfront partnered with a startup called Sidewalk Labs to turn Toronto's waterfront into a proving ground for technology-enabled urban environments around the world. I'm sure some of you have heard about this. But the initiative aimed to integrate self-driving shuttles, adaptive traffic lights, modular housing, freight delivering robots, in line with a city commitment to actually waive or exempt many existing regulations in areas like building codes, transportation, and energy in order to build the city it envisioned. So the process engaged stakeholders and recognized that developing regulations should work in tandem with piloting, developing the technology. And I think this is another mode of regulating by goal, where the goal also needs to be imagined and discussed in a multi-stakeholder way.
Excellent. So we also see that there are many kind of also deliberative approaches that you can also find on our observatory's platform on where we collect public sector innovation. So we have also a lot of cases of deliberative approaches to artificial intelligence, and also the Sidewalk Lab that we have gone and visited ourselves. We're getting really interesting and complicated questions from the audience that I also don't want to waste. So we have a very complex question from Günta Krumina, who is asking about, is it actually possible to navigate your way out or chart your way out of complexity? As in system thinking, when we deal with complexity, we can learn and understand it, and make sense of it. We can find a leverage point to influence the system and hopefully improve it, but we can't really get out of it. Should we rather talk about successful navigations through the complexity? So navigating complexity in its entirety. So I'm going to go maybe to Márton first. I'm going to say, like, how does EIT navigate complexity? And was also picking a little bit further on the kind of the sense-making part of how EIT strategy office works.
Thank you very much. Indeed, a very, very complex question. Probably, I think, as I said in my introduction, I think we need to, first of all, accept and learn to accept that we live in basically what can be characterized as a complex adaptive system, that of culture, market, technology, regulation, and so on. And we know that in such systems, actually speed is a sense. So when it comes to influencing it, so finding all the leverages or chartering the way out of it, I would still believe that there are points of leverage in such complex adaptive systems, which can be found in aspects I've mentioned before: distribution, subsidiarity, and so on. Is that if you have actors basically cooperating with each other, so the example of regulation and innovators or businesses, because especially large ones, they who deal with R&D, they deal more with these days, more development than basic research. Is probably more outsourced to be funded by government these days. But the speed. So I think some examples that they have seen that can also be probably be more popular in the future, such as frontrunner approaches. Japan tried with certain electronics and energy efficiency, or building codes, how they were designed in Denmark. So where you basically set the goal on the frontrunners and say that the minimum standard will be that off in a couple of years. So basically by this, innovation and lead by business and the results become the standards, which then government can refer to. And I think that's one good way of dealing with this complex system in a way. As I explained, I mean, you're right. I mean, the EIT is definitely bound by a vast amount of EU rules and regulations that we are not exempt of, and there were minimum, very minor derogations from these rules, but at least the model, it was set up probably in a way to be able to tackle this. And we want to further improve on this. So for example, even minimize the administrative barriers. We try to do multi-annual grants now for the future instead of annual grants. Also, we'll change the way how we monitor the implementation of these projects, and again, link it back to this impact framework that we are deploying. So we can see that the long-term impact we have is probably not possible to be predicted right away, but we assign certain kind of probability of meeting these with the proxies, with the outputs, with the deliverables we can take away from a project. right? Just a very banal example I can give to you. I mean, I've mentioned that we have more than 3,000 students who graduated from EIT labeled master and PhD courses. And we set the framework for such courses, which include involvement of businesses, research sectors in developing and deploying the curricula, international mobility. All these aspects are there to ensure that we also have entrepreneurs, not only students, coming out from the universities. But can I tell you which one of those will be the next Steve Jobs? No, not yet. We know that the average age of startuppers is 42, I think, in the EU right now. So this is not the age we have these graduates coming out at the moment. But I very much hope, and we have very high hope, that actually all the proxy indicators we use, how many of them are involved in startups, if not owning it, but being involved, how many of them contribute to, I don't know, innovations, patents, and so on. That's at least a promising proxy. And indeed, it takes time to look back, and we'll have to deploy reviews pretty often, which allow us to see how these interventions in this uncertainty, but through this logic, contributes to achieving the goals we want to.
Excellent. Thank you, Márton. I think you're pointing to something that is really, really important, is the way actually public organizations and governments can actually learn. So you have all of these new monitoring ways and also impact measurement and how you do that. But how do we actually take that on board and learn from it? So we have a question from a participant who is a colleague of mine at the OECD, Edwin Lau, who also asks directly to Hiroki, how do you make goal-based regulation systems also learning systems that can collect and build on what works? So when you build those goal-based systems, like how does the government actually, how does the ministry learn from that and adapt kind of real-time perspective as well?
Thank you for a great question. Actually, goal-based regulation doesn't mean that the government will provide goals and leave everything to the private party. It's opposite. In fact, when you do the goal-based regulation, the government should always check whether the goal is achieved or not. But having said so, the government, if the government just leaves everything to the private party, maybe SMEs will face a difficulty to achieving goals. And the purpose of the government is not to impose sanctions, but to have the private parties achieve goals. For that purpose, we also believe that it's extremely important to provide appropriate standards or guidelines for the private parties. And those private standards or guidelines will be provided not purely by the public sector, but multi-stakeholder approach. So actually, one of the most important missions for the government is to figure out in which sector or in which area we need standards or guidelines to support private businesses, and what stakeholders to gather to make such kind of standards or guidelines. And also, we addressed the importance of the collaborative enforcement. By saying collaborative enforcement, I mean that if the government says, if you just fail to achieve this goal, then the government will punish you. Then maybe the private sectors will try to hide the information, or they are not willing to disclose information because by saying so, they might be sanctioned. So in the opposite way, so what we address is that the government should say, okay, please collaborate with our investigation. And even if there is a problem, but if the business party can prove that they had a good compliance program and they cooperate with investigation and they commit to improve their operations in the future, then the government will not punish the business. For example, by this kind of mechanisms, the government can incentivize business parties to give or disclose more information. And by doing so, the government also can learn what would be the problem in the future. So that is our tentative answer.
Excellent, thank you. Another great audience question coming in from Ilias Kastritis, who also is kind of a general comment on what foresight does is shift the perspective to the long term. If these scenarios are not translated into today's decision to a debated, desired, plausible future, then it does not gain traction as the kickstarter of conversations regarding what resilient strategies fit for the medium term. So how do we actually shake the decision makers out from kind of making decisions based on today, but actually taking into the kind of long-term perspective into account, but acting in the present? So we have also seen this as a major issue in doing our anticipatory innovation governance work, is that there is a huge kind of impact gap in terms of futures thinking, that we also tend to think that the future is far away and we are supposed to start acting kind of in the future. But as many have found as well, that, you know, climate change and some of the challenges are, you know, we are the last generation to make a difference. So we have to act today to feel the difference in the future. So how to actually motivate public officials to act that way? I will give it over to David first.
Piret, you give me the hard one, yeah. I don't know. I think it's a classic and very difficult problem. I think in the world of science, technology, and innovation, the missions orientation mechanism is one attempt to bridge that gap, whereby a longer term goal, whether it's reducing or decarbonizing production systems, in a bigger sense, addressing climate change, thinking about multiple pathways to those goals. The mission-driven approach tries to develop a kind of step-by-step approach of kind of an actionable course moving forward. And so I think that eventually leads up to a kind of accomplishment of a clear and visible mission. So I think the visibility of the goal that many people can get behind, and then the articulation of a step-by-step approach can create the kinds of incentives in the science and technology community to move forward. The other thing that a missions approach does is it forces a kind of cooperation, or I should say coordination, among discrete agencies, which just makes it easier to move towards a longer term goal and to innovate actually in the kinds of structures that are necessary to move across governments and so forth.
Great. Elena, do you have the magic solution for us?
Yeah, that's a very good question indeed. And I can only agree with with this comment, but maybe also develop it a bit further. So the challenge there is that, of course, one can talk about long-term future and different alternative plausible long-term futures and short-term actions that would be desirable or not desirable in each of those long-term futures. But the challenge, of course, is that, and that's maybe one of the reasons why this indeed doesn't have much traction, is that for every future you may think of a different set of actions, and then, you know, the number of these foresight exercises, as we know, is huge, and the number of possible alternative scenarios is also big, and so this multiplies, and then one can easily ask the question, yeah, if everything is possible at the end, and then for every scenario there is something we can do, but then at the end, what do we have to do? And so the approaches to that is to think in terms of, again, to harness the power of system thinking and to try to find what is sometimes called robust portfolios of options or robust solutions. And that means that there are, or try to identify set of actions which actually work across those different scenarios. And that, of course, is very difficult, and that requires really investigating what is sometimes called co-benefits or core multiple dividends or this kind of notion. So you identify one action, but you also find a way how this action can be beneficial should the other scenario be realized. Yeah, and so that finding such solutions is really what we want to do, but that, of course, is a very hard task.
Excellent. Márton.
Thank you. I just would like to compliment what also Jelena said. I think indeed this is a hard one, but probably at least to give a bit of a hope, I think this is also important that, yes, we are dealing with complex systems. We know that finding the leverages in such systems is difficult. We discussed about the terms, speed, political systems, presence, and so on. We know the pressure from society, for example, against certain measures, maybe something to be too cautious, or may this be around data privacy issues. But I think what is good news is that we know from science that there is a relatively small number of what we call system archetypes, where at least relatively well, it is possible to understand causality between interaction and the actors, what you can see there. We know why there are always fixes that fail, why there are escalations in certain fields, where do you have limits to growth, and so on. And if, policymakers were able to embrace that this notion is possible to be described with this, I think at least this is a good step forward. Of course, we need to empower the society also to accept these points. And I think what is also important is the reward system to both policymakers but politicians as well. When you have an intervention like this, maybe the EIT or other interventions colleague mentioned, to accept the fact that measuring clear attribution and or contribution to such changes is often simply not possible with a degree of complete certainty or 100%. So, if we all make a step towards this flexibility in terms of understanding uncertainty, then I think it still allows us not to just say, okay, we relax back, we have nothing to do, but we have probably, by dividing these bigger system, the complex system, to smaller ones, when we can understand these archetypes, it's easier to find these leverages, actually.
Great. But I'm now going to switch from this anonymous policymaker that we keep on talking about to you personally. So what are you personally committed to doing differently based on what the recent crisis has revealed? Can we start with Hiroki?
Sure. So I believe that it is maybe time for us, government, to admit that it is impossible to plan and order everything by ourselves. The only thing I know is that I know nothing, like Socrates. What we need are like goal-based, multi-stakeholder deliberation, experiments, cross-discipline, and cross-border approach. Those kind of things. To achieve these goals, Japan government established a Digital Architecture Design Center this May to design social infrastructure, including hardware, software, and rules for everybody. We have also started to exchange best practices of new regulatory approaches with other nations. Let's keep our conversation for the better future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Jelena, what will you do differently?
Very quickly, whenever we do any new scientific project, any new research, we will think not only how we fulfill the goals and serve the purpose of this particular project, but also thinking how this knowledge that we create would be generalizable for future crises.
Excellent. David?
Well, I think, as I said before, there's a real experiment going on in how we do science, technology, and innovation. That this current crisis has given rise to many different models of how to collaborate and how to cooperate across countries and across sectors. So what this has triggered in our group is the desire to study this and to see if from this kind of diversity of models, we can take out of it a sense of kind of what might work in other contexts, whether it's vaccine development or antimicrobial resistance, or both public goods, but also other kinds of health goods.
Excellent. And Márton?
Difficult one. My new resolution will be about to make sure I walk the talk. not to panic, but to be better safe than sorry. To invest in future, in the sense both for the organization, myself, and family, that we make sure that we are fit for fight with uncertainty.
Thank you. So me personally, so not leaving myself out, I also commit to writing more about what we do. So we at the Observatory do a lot of action-oriented projects connected exactly to these topics, but it's always too busy to write it up or kind of feedback in real time for these lessons. So I'll commit to doing that. Thank you all the panelists for your great contributions. It was a fantastic discussion. We also had many questions that we didn't get to answer from our participants. There was a great discussion going on in the chat as well, so I'll take a look at it later on. But thank you so much for joining Government After Shock and discussing this very complex and difficult topic. But hopefully with our personal and our organizational contributions, we will be prepared for the next crisis in a better way, and also maybe anticipate and avoid it. Thank you all for joining us, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Piret.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.